Hello, and welcome to another episode of my podcast, The Global Agora. My name is Andrej Matišak, and I work as the Deputy Head of Foreign Desk in Slovak Daily Pravda, which, by the way, means truth, and it's not Russian Pravda. Does the European Parliament have a new majority? Is the EPP normalizing the far right? And why does EPP Chair Manfred Weber vote with the Patriots when he and the President of the Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, are essentially portrayed as political antichrists in Viktor Orbán's Hungary? Eric Morris, a policy analyst at the European Policy Center, explains what is happening in the European Parliament and in European politics. Listen to our conversation. If you enjoy what I do, please support me on Coffee. For the link, see also a description of this episode. And now, up to the new debate. Eric, last week the European Parliament passed the EU's first omnibus simplification package aimed at easing corporate sustainability reporting requirements. The majority was formed when the center-right EPP was joined by the far-right Patriots, the more right-wing ECR group, as well as some Socialist and Renew MEPs. Before the vote, EPP Chair Manfred Weber told Politico, "We promised voters we would cut unnecessary red tape, and we would do so. The vote is about nothing else." So is this vote merely a political episode, or does it mark the emergence of a new majority in the parliament, or is it something in between?
I would say it is something in between. Well, first, it's not a surprise. We've seen it coming since the start of this new parliament with what was called the Venezuela coalition, meaning the EPP, part of ECR, and sometimes part of Patriots for Europe also voting together on issues. They did it on resolutions before, and now it was the first time they did it on a legislative text. So symbolically, it can be more important, but I think it just confirms that there is no von der Leyen coalition or no pro-EU majority in the parliament. There can be a majority on many texts. That's what we've seen so far. And because the votes of the EPP, the centrists, the Social Democrats, and sometimes the Greens together, this time was the first time there was a text adopted by an alternative majority. So this majority exists, but it's not a coalition in the sense that they are allied politically, aligned, meaning with the same positions to defend, bound by a kind of coalition agreement or a common program, common platform. They had a document they agreed on after the last elections, but even them called it a platform, not a coalition agreement or whatever. So what we saw from the start is that the EPP is not only the biggest group in the parliament, but now the central one, meaning the one that can make or break the majorities. Usually this role was played by the centrist liberals, the Renew group, but now it's the EPP. And that's what Manfred Weber said. In a way, the EPP has its political agenda and it's determined to implement it, whether it is with the pro-EU majority or the traditional majority with the Renew, SND, and sometimes the Greens, or is it with the other people who are ready to follow them on some issues, meaning ECR, PFE?
How would you describe the EPP agenda? And is the EPP united on this?
Well, as in all groups, you can have differences on some issues, but the main lines of the EPP nowadays is competitiveness, simplification, more control on migration, for instance, of course, more investment in defense, and linked to competitiveness and simplification, it is reshaping the Green Deal or the Green Agenda, meaning that the idea of giving priority to climate or the fight against climate change and carbon neutral economy is not prioritized, and now the priority is competitiveness and the industry. Of course, both are linked because today competitiveness and innovation can be done through green innovations, or at least, going out of fossil fuels, linking energy policy with technological innovation and so on. But if we have to push back on a few targets for the Green Deals, it's not a problem for them. They reversed the priorities compared to the last term, where the targets were the most important, and then the industry had to follow, had to implement to achieve these targets. Now it's, okay, we move the targets if it allows or it helps the industry to be competitive. So that's the main line of the EPP agenda, with simplification, which is seen also as something that's detrimental to competitiveness, because the red tape has a cost, or at least that's the argument, especially in a world where the US is having less and less red tape as well, and where in China they have the investment, public investment, to go that way, meaning innovation, technological innovation for the clean industry or for AI industry and all these tech industries. And for that, I mean, the EPP, I would say, in a way, it's politically agnostic. They need a majority to pass the simplification and competitiveness agenda, and they will do it with whatever majority they can find. And that's also what the president of the European Parliament said after the European Council, which, by the way, it's another point or another reason why I think it's not a complete tipping point in a way, or, not something completely new, is that, of course, the Parliament is not going far right. And at the same time, the Parliament, in a way, is getting aligned with the Council, with the member states, because they want simplification, they want competitiveness. That's competitiveness with defense are the priorities of the strategic agenda. So in a way, everyone has to deliver, and that's the EPP's way to deliver. That's the Commission's way to deliver. And so the agenda that we see with this vote is not only far-right Parliament's agenda, it's the EU's agenda, which is implemented by the biggest political force in the EU currently, namely the EPP, the biggest group in the Parliament, the most represented political family in the European Council, and also party of the President of the European Commission and of the majority of the commissioners.
So I'm looking at this as a political issue, and maybe I'm too critical, but it seems to me that the EPP, and of course also the European Council, or majority in the Council, is willing to weaken green rules because they believe they also can score political points that were previously captured by the more climate skeptic high right. Is this a good political strategy, or is it rather short-sighted?
I think the question for the EPP and, of course, for the Parliament and for the EU's political direction is to what extent the EPP will or risks becoming hostage of ECR and PFE. Meaning, is the EPP completely managing the process of finding alternative majorities? Because I think their calculation is that, and I think that was the political signal that they expressed through this vote, is telling to the pro-EU majority, okay, we have our political agenda, we can find the majority we need. So either you come with us and you make the compromise, or we go on the other side of the Parliament and we find an alternative majority. And it is true that SND, Renew, the Greens cannot build an alternative majority on their own. So in a way, they are under pressure from the EPP to accept the EPP's terms and political line, to try to mitigate it in a way and make compromises. But in the end, EPP calls the shots. But if the EPP goes too far and proposes things that are really unacceptable to Renew and SND and Greens, they risk getting into a situation where they need the alternative majority, and then they have to accept amendments and elements coming from ECR and then PFE. That's a risk. I'm not saying that will happen, but that's the risk of their strategy backfiring. And then for the EPP or for the Parliament, the question is, will the EPP still try to get first an agreement with the pro-EU majority and having as a backup plan this alternative majority? Or will they do a majority shopping and will work with whoever is ready to follow them, but from the start, not after they failed to agree with the other majority?
Eric, you're reading my mind a bit, because I wanted to ask you about this. That if the APP, if they have options, like you just mentioned, what's your forecast?
I think they will continue to try to work first with the other parties. First, because that's the usual way of doing things, and also because of the potential side effects in the European Council. Because, of course, in the European Council, you still need to have agreements between, even if it's a national dynamics there. In the European Council, you still have, coordination between the parties and you need agreements. And it's still better to have this. I don't like the pro-EU label because it doesn't mean anything. But still, let's use this one. You need a pro-EU majority to take decisions in the European Council. You cannot burn bridges with S&D and Renew if you are the EPP. Because also, you don't know how this could evolve with ECR and PFE. I mean, they clearly are against a lot of political priorities of the EPP. I will just mention Ukraine, defense, especially PFE. ECR is a bit different because you have, of course, the Czechs, the Italians, for instance, the Poles, of course. But on other issues related to EU integration, it's much better to work with or finding solutions to the crisis. It's still better to work with, the guys we know and with whom we share the same EU interest. And politically, also in the member states, it's difficult. Of course, you have some national parties accommodating the far right, but in other member states, it's difficult. So having the EPP going full conservative, nationalist, far right could backfire in different member states. So I think strategically, pragmatically, politically, it would not be a good idea to go completely with this alternative majority. But tactically, it makes sense for them because it helps them, at least for now, on this kind of issues, it helps them achieving their goals.
How do you think that the S&D, Renew, and maybe even Greens should react to the situation? Should they be more open to the EPP proposals or what they can do?
It's not an easy situation for them because if we look at the options they have, first one is trying to have the EPP making more compromise than they are ready to do. It's difficult because the EPP can go to the alternative majority, but again, not on all issues and not all the time. So they have some kind of leverage there. They can try to do that. But they have no alternative majority. It's not like in a national parliament where you can say, okay, I lead the coalition and that brings down the government. You cannot do that in the EU. Can we envisage S&D or the Greens to say, okay, I will put a motion of censure against the Commission, but that would be kind of a nuclear option, which, problem of nuclear option is that it can destroy everyone. And maybe they would not win that motion, and so it would have even less leverage. And so I think their options are limited. They can politically try to, in a way, the name and shame the EPP, but we've seen that so far that hasn't worked. So they don't have many options. Maybe the main option is to select the issues on which they are ready to compromise and the ones on which it could create a problem for the EPP to go to the alternative majority. But it's not easy. I mean, how can you choose that? Because for them, environment, climate, social responsibility of companies, and which was the topic of this vote, is an important topic. If you look at migration also, in terms of convictions, is it better to compromise with the EPP or to allow the EPP and the far right to have a text together? So I think it raises a lot of questions with no easy answers. And I'm not sure the EPP tactically has all the cards in hand. Sure, there will be other votes like this one, but I don't think for the EPP it will be the preferred option, the first option or the systematic option.
Maybe on the personal level, or a bit on the personal level, Manfred Weber is essentially political antichrist in Viktor Orban's Hungary, yet the EPP is still willing to vote with Orban's patriots. Isn't that a paradox?
I would make a difference between EPP accepting Fidesz or PFE's votes on amendments and text, full text, because again, they can get their majority and achieve what they want. And there's a difference between EPP voting for PFE's amendments. For me, that would be a real change. That means you accept their political positions and you allow them, you enable them to have influence and to really shape the EU according to your far-right views. So I don't think that accepting, voting on the same thing, for me, it's not, because it happens also in the EU or at national level that sometimes you have far right and left voting on something. It's not because another party votes like you that you are politically allied or in coalition, or that you sold your soul to them. But if you vote for them for what they present, it's something different. And of course, imagine the EPP voting for a PFE's amendment on something which is controversial. Of course, that would be a new situation because that would create a precedent.
What role do Robert Metsola and Ursula von der Leyen play in all of this? It seems that far right is, let's say, okay with Metsola, but less so with von der Leyen.
Well, because Metsola is only president of the parliament. Von der Leyen is president of the commission, which has, many powers, including the right of initiative. Von der Leyen also is more visible. She's a member of the European Council in a way, or she is. So in a way, she's also one of the executive leaders of the EU, and also through the Spitzenkandidat process, the election of the president of the Commission by the European Parliament, and this idea of having, a coalition, a political coalition supporting the Commission, which should reflect the political priorities of the Parliament, and also von der Leyen last year negotiating herself directly with the political groups to put together this so-called coalition. That exposed von der Leyen politically. Because for the far right, she's not only a visible figure of the EU, someone who is identified by citizens as an EU leader, but she's also the manager of, the pro-EU majority. So she becomes a political target for that, of course. And when I said that she's identified by citizens, I think there is an ambiguity there that, of course, a lot of people in the EU know that Ursula von der Leyen is the president of the European Commission, that she has very important powers and that she is part of the decisions taken in the EU. But I think it's in many cases in a negative way, meaning von der Leyen is the bureaucrat in chief deciding in place of the national governments. If you take the Green Deal, I guess it's the same in Slovakia, but in my home country, France, how many times did I read or hear people say von der Leyen decided to abolish, petrol engine cars? Well, no, she did not decide. She proposed, the Commission proposed, and then it was adopted by the directly elected MEPs and by our ministers. But for the people, it's von der Leyen decided. So the recognition that from which she benefits, I'm not sure it's a positive thing, because you don't have the second part of this recognition, which is the understanding of the role of the Commission. And so, of course, for the far right, and we see that in Hungary, she's the target. She embodies the EU, which takes sovereignty from the member states, which is bureaucracy, which is not legitimate, not democratic, and she's the figure for that. So, of course, that's the second reason for which she is the target. The first one is that in the parliament, she's involved in party politics, the management of the coalition, and more generally, as part of the political games or the strategy of the Eurosceptics and far-right parties, she's just the embodiment of the undemocratic, bureaucratic EU.
Eric, last two questions. So it seems to me that you are a bit less concerned than some other people I talk to, some analysts, observers, that EPP is doing is basically a normalization of the far right, that they expect to see more EPP far right cooperation also at the national level. Am I right? Are you a bit less concerned than some other people?
I would not say I'm not concerned, but I think this vote doesn't mean what many people say. It's not the parliament becoming far right. It's not the EPP becoming far right. It's not the EU's agenda becoming far right, but it shows first that there is a shift in European politics, which is just the consequence and reflection of the shift in member states, because of course, MEPs are elected by citizens in each member state. It's also a reflection of the shift in priorities, because as I said, it's also the priority of the member states. And it's also a sign of the fragmentation of the European Parliament, and I would not say polarization, but at least growing disagreement between mainstream parties on what to do. That said, I think we should closely look at how this could enable the nationalists, Eurosceptics, far right, enable them to influence the EU's political agenda. Meaning, again, as long as they vote for what the EPP wants, I don't see a problem. But as soon as the EPP will accept shifts or accept amendments, will accept changes in, or if European Parliament's position represents an agreement between these parties to shift the proposal in one direction, that would change. For now, I just see the EPP delivering in a way and we saw that in the last European Council, that was Friedrich Merz saying that. Well, what is the Parliament waiting for? Well, waiting for this alternative majority. So I will be concerned when or if you can see that there is something specific to the Parliament and clearly identified on the right, so that the EPP should be cautious with this risk of enabling or allowing the influence of the far right growing on the agenda. Because now also, I think what is new with this Parliament is that the far right is better organized and more ambitious, meaning until now they would vote against everything. The discipline within the groups was the lowest, meaning, the coherence of their vote would be the lowest. Now we feel that they have an agenda and that they want this agenda to be reflected somehow. So their goal, their objective is to shape the legislative proposals and to shape what will be the position of the Parliament. And so the EPP should be very careful not allowing that, not opening the window of the far right agenda.
Again, to wrap it up, one question linked to Slovakia. From what we know, Slovak Prime Minister Robert Fico has not yet decided whether his party will join the Patriots. But if he does, and if Andrej Babiš returns, the Patriots could have 3 members of the European Council. How significant would it be? Also, of course, we have to add that we don't know yet what will happen to Orban after next spring elections.
Yeah, well, if, and that's a big if, Orban loses the elections, he would be here for 2 European Council, December and March. And then probably he would be gone for the June Council. And we have to see if Babiš can be there in December. No, he hopes, but Petro Pavel is not allowing that. Yeah. But of course, the problem is that you have 3, or, in the European Council, it's not a veto power because they don't vote, but you have 2 more leaders in a position to block decisions and to oppose the consensus. If you look at what happened since Fico came back on Ukraine, for instance, the conclusions on Ukraine are separated from the other conclusions because they are not endorsed by Hungary, but they are endorsed by Slovakia. Would that change? I don't know. But why would Fico oppose something which he didn't oppose before? Just because because he would be part of the group, but it's always the question of the balance between national interest and party interest in the European Council. As I said, it's mostly national, but you have coordination. So the Fico's positions would have to be clarified. And for Babiš, what we hear since he won the election is that he's pragmatic and looking at his business. So on Babiš, I want to see, because of course he's a pragmatic, or even without any fixed political ideas, but he's an opportunistic. And I think we should not underestimate the logic of being part of Patriots for Europe. And also the internal logic, if he goes into this coalition with the motorists, with the SPD, well, it's clearly far right. So I don't know, it's very difficult to anticipate what that could lead to, but probably no easier discussions in the European Council for sure.
This was another episode of my podcast, The Global Agora. Subscribe, listen on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and on the other platforms. If you enjoy what I do, please support me on Ko-fi. For the link, see also the description of this episode. Thank you for listening and stay tuned.